Well, how did we get here, and what is next for the Cleveland Cavaliers? Those are some of the questions I'm sure many of you watching, and Tommy and I both have as we get ready for another episode of the Cavs Insider Podcast. Welcome into another episode of the Cavs Insider Podcast. I think Tommy and I have a little bit of energy behind us after a couple days to lick the wounds, if you will, from whatever it was that we watched over the weekend in New York with this team. But Tommy, I think really a good place to start is with that question I threw out at the top, sort of in the intro there. Just how the hell did we get to a point where the Cavs are down 3-1 to the Knicks? And not only down 3-1, like it's not like they're down 3-1 playing close games and guys just, in crunch time aren't stepping up or something like that. They're down 3-1 and look like they've been thoroughly dominated in the series. How exactly did we get here?
Do you want my simple answer? Jalen Brunson. I mean, that's what it comes down to for me. I mean, you watch him play, he's taken over this series. I mean, he's been incredible. It's like frustrating to watch because it's one of those things where like he's taking all these mid-range shots and everything, and it's like, oh, there's no way he makes another one. There's no way he makes another one. And then he just comes down the floor and makes another one. And it's like, well, I mean, that's what you have to stop, and it hasn't happened.
That spot of his right at the elbow seems to be like a go-to spot for him at this point in the series, but also I guess now in his career where he just gets to that spot and he seems to knock down every single shot that he takes from there. It's remarkable. I think that is probably the simple answer. But on a larger scale, like there's bigger problems here that go beyond just Jalen Brunson. I think we'll get into Donovan Mitchell and listen. The thing I'll say to start off with Donovan before we get to that later, I did not envision him shrinking the way he did. Even in Game 3, it felt like he wasn't really assertive enough, and then in Game 4, it was just a complete disaster for him. And for a guy who hyped up how excited he was about playing in that building, I did not expect that. And I don't think anybody expected that. But
I don't think he expected that at all.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about him in a little bit because I think that is the obvious conversation starter that people have. But on another level, beyond Jalen Brunson, I think, listen, I came into the series assuming that the Cavs, not even assuming, the statistics showed that the Cavaliers were a better team. They were a better defensive team. Offensively, the Knicks were maybe a little bit better, but the Cavs are right there. They were a top 10 team in offensive and defensive efficiency, which is generally those are teams that are usually competing for championships or making deep playoff runs. And yeah, they obviously have gotten a little bit shell shocked here by what the Knicks have thrown their way. And I didn't expect the performances that we're getting. I did expect what Jalen Brunson was doing. We sort of learned in that last matchup of the regular season that he could take over games if needed. But I didn't expect the Josh Hart performances. Like he was a role player, and I'm a very much in the playoffs it's play 7 guys, trust 6, right? And he has 17 points, 13 points, and 19 points in 3 of the games. He shot 72%. 80% and over 40% in those games, respectively. Like, he is just putting on a role player clinic, and the Cavs don't have somebody like that off the bench other than Karis LeVert, who surprisingly is probably the one guy who I think who showed over the weekend in New York to maybe be the one guy who wasn't afraid of the moment. Like, he was the one guy who seemed like he was hustling on both ends, wasn't really rattled, and the rest of the team, it was just like they're shell-shocked. But then beyond even Josh Hart, it's like, the rebounding is a problem. And we knew that there have been some weird games this year where the Cavs have 2 7-footers out there, but they're getting out rebounded. You kind of ask yourself why. Well, now we're seeing why. Like, Mitchell Robinson is just straight up bullying them. Like, they have no answer on the interior as sort of, I guess, some lankier, leaner big men. And him and Evan Mobley are, all due respect to Evan Mobley, because I think he's had a fine series for being his first experience going on the road to in a playoff game, in a playoff series. So I do understand that for him, and I think he's played relatively well. on the defensive end especially, but both of those guys are just getting pushed around right now, and it's kind of a wake-up call.
Yeah, going back to the Josh Hart thing, you mentioned that on paper, the Cavs were the better team. I think that we may have underestimated that a little bit, and I think there's a reason for that. Josh Hart was a deadline acquisition, right? So he was only with the team for the last part of the year. So it is interesting to me to think about, what would this team look like? Where would this team be if Josh Hart was on that team the entire year? Kind of going to the paint here. I had a thought watching Game 4. I don't know. It might be a hot take here, but I don't think that Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen are playing as bad as people think. They need to be playing better. No question about it. No question about it. They need to be playing better. When I watch Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley play right now, man, they just look tired. They just look tired. And I think that also comes back to us underestimating New York size. I mean, they just keep throwing these Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein is having a fantastic series.
Yeah.
Obi Toppin, it's just 7-footers after 7-footers. And I think that, when Jarrett Allen or Evan Mobley have to be on the floor, one of them have to be on the floor at all times. I think that they're just getting tired, and they're tired of, the physicality of it. And I think that is really coming. That really lost my train of thought there, but I think that it's getting exposed. It's really getting exposed.
No, I think you bring up a good point, and maybe the fatigue at the end of games especially has to do with just the fact that they spend the entire game trying to compete with these bigger bodies in there, and they're getting sort of pushed around a little bit. I mean, I think the proof is in the tape, and I think it's obvious that they're getting boxed out. They're getting sort of forcibly removed from the paint when other guys are, when guys like you said, and Mitchell Robinson and Hartenstein are sort of exuding their will down there. It's been a problem. And I think that kind of comes late in games. You're seeing them maybe be a little more fatigued. My thing with Evan Mobley, I don't think Evan Mobley's played a poor series. I just think what I've seen from Mobley is, like, defensively it's still there. All the things that we were hyped about him in the regular season, still very much there. And I think what I want more of is, particularly on the offensive end. But that's been talked about all year, and I think now in the playoffs it's just getting a little bit more exposed. But the thing for me, Tommy, is like in this instance, I'm less worried about Mobley getting pushed around and maybe having some offensive issues where he's not making that hook shot that he normally makes, and he's getting to his spots, but it's just not falling. Maybe there's some nerves there, and it's a big stage, and I can wrap my head around that for Mobley. And I can wrap my head around the fact that we all believe consensus is he's going to end up being a star. He's going to be okay. He's going to be a good player. Maybe he needs to bulk up a little bit. But, I mean, you had Giannis, I think, recently saying that he thinks Evan Mobley's going to be better, or could be better than he even is. So that's pretty high praise. Like, everybody around the league and who covers his team or follows his team believes he's going to be a star. And if he's not there yet, in year 2 of his career as a 21-year-old, first time going on the road in a playoff series, I can accept that. But Jarrett Allen getting bodied as a guy who's been in the playoffs before, he's been in this environment, and just kind of feeling like a ghost out there at times, that is where I'm starting to kind of look and say maybe they're going to have to, at some point, reconsider the configuration of this team.
Yeah, that sure is a hot take. I think that this is definitely it is still a small sample size. I mean, this is their first playoff series as a group, and they're playing against a team that honestly doesn't quite match up with them. We thought.
Oh yeah, it's a bad matchup. And the other thing too, real quick, Tom. Sorry to interrupt. The other thing too, you brought up the Knicks earlier and how they've played, maybe underestimating them. I will say, like, they have really amped up on the defensive end, because they weren't a great defensive team during the regular season, and that's changed in the playoffs.
For sure, absolutely. I like I said, I still think it's a pretty small sample size to say that we need to blow up the team and get rid of Jarrett Allen, because he has been good in the regular season, and I don't know. I don't watching the game over the weekend. I don't know what else to say, but I think that there still needs to be more. We still need more time. Obviously, I think that when it comes to Allen, the one thing I really wish I've seen more from him is the offense. Like, I don't even know. The defense is going to be there. He's a 7-footer and everything, but I don't know. I wish I would have seen more offense. Last year it was his footwork was fantastic last year, and I feel like that's just gone now. I don't know where that's been.
I will say, and I threw this out there on the radio station I work at locally, that I wondered if JB Bickerstaff, and maybe this is his break glass in case of emergency thing in his pocket, and he did do this a little bit in Game 4. I wonder if because it seems like Jared Allen just isn't through long stretches of the game giving you what you need, and he's getting beat for offensive boards for the Knicks, and that's been a Achilles heel of this series, really, has been just the chasing down of rebounds and the Cavs getting out and hustled for those. To me, offensive boards is like an effort thing, and the Cavs are continually just getting out efforted for those. That's probably, as I've watched this series, Tommy, that's the thing that has me like ripping out my hair the most is just watching the Knicks like chase down these rebounds. There was one in Game 4 that like it was a long rebound, and Mobley just kind of assumed it was going to go out of bounds, so he backed off it. And then I think it was Josh Hart who actually went and like chased it down and gets it and saves it for the Knicks, and then they hit a three, and it was like a huge momentum swing for them. Like, this stuff is just frustrating. I'm sitting there infuriated watching it, but I wondered if JB Bickerstaff, to get back to my main point here, would maybe try a small lineup because maybe Jared Allen just isn't getting it done for you, and you could take advantage of the fact that the Knicks start two bigs maybe. We saw it in a very small stretch, and I was in the car driving home from work at the time when they ran it before I got home at the half, and so I didn't see exactly how efficient it was, but they did do that momentarily, and I wonder if we see some of that maybe in Game 5 as let's see if this works, because listen, you're on the brink of elimination. You got nothing to lose at this point. You got to throw something out there.
Yeah, I was watching the game. It did look better. However, I do think that if all of a sudden JB Bickerstaff starts going to that more, I do think that the Knicks can easily counter it with either playing Hart as small forward, even throwing him at the power forward, because he certainly can rebound like a power forward. So, and
we know that when the Knicks went sort of a sped up pace in that last regular season game in particular, they sped up the pace a little bit. That was a problem for the Cavs. That was a problem for the Cavs all year because they play so slow. So maybe you don't want to tempt them either.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the one thing I noticed in Game 4 was that you could tell that the Cavs were trying to get back to that. They had the slowest pace in the NBA at the end of the season. It was about the entire season, and that's really where they have seen a lot of success from. But I think that when you try to play slow, especially on the road in the playoffs, when the momentum is just going to be huge and the environment just going to be a lot louder and a lot more engaged from the fans and everything, that slower pace sometimes can backfire pretty easily. And I think that we've seen quite a bit of that.
I want to pull up a couple tweets here, or comments rather, that we're getting in. This one from TuneIn Sports 1. He says, "Can we play Lamar? Rubio keeps getting minutes, but no Lamar. LOL." I think it's a fair question. Listen, I don't know that Lamar Stevens is like the saving grace, that it's not some magic elixir that you bring him in and all of a sudden the Cavs are going to be up in this series, or things will be differently if you're playing Lamar Stevens. But I mentioned, break glass in case of emergency. At this point, why not give Lamar Stevens some minutes? He averaged 18 minutes on the season. He was playing down the stretch. We know Dean Wade is basically just not an option at this point. You might as well put somebody out there. Lamar Stevens is going to give you effort. When you talk about trying to get offensive boards, he's a guy that maybe does that for you.
He's the effort guy. I mean, we saw it all year. When you would set a small lineup, he was one of the first people I went to or thought of, because I feel if you are going to, like you say, break glass in case of emergency, this is what we have to go to. I feel way more comfortable with Lamar Stevens at a power forward than Isaac Okoro, and that's what the small lineup was for them. I mean, he's just, like you said, he's the effort guy. He can shoot the three. He doesn't shoot it a lot. I know the numbers may not support it, but he can. He's that cut slasher, get to the basket, which right now that's what the Cavs are missing.
I understand too why there'd be some hesitancy against playing him, because the Knicks are going to defend him the same way they defended Okoro. They're going to sag off on defense and say, well, we don't trust him to knock down threes or take the jump shots, so we'll just kind of leave him alone, and that's a problem on the offensive end. But even in some spurts, he might be that effort guy that gets a spark for you, grabs a rebound, gets you a second chance bucket. Anything like that at this point I think would pay dividends. I also wanted to pull up this one real quick. Tom K says Mobley is handling Julius Randle. I think he's right. I also think this points to a larger thought here of How the hell, like, that's another, to go back to the original question of, like, how did we get here? If you had shown me Julius Randle's stat lines for the first 4 games before the series started, I would have thought the Cavs were up 3-1. Like, I would have said, oh, they're up 3-1 in the series. There's no way that they're down 3-1. Like, it is mind-boggling that even their best player, arguably, and maybe Jalen Brunson surpassed him at this point, I don't know, but
I think so.
He is not even really a factor in these games whatsoever, and the Cavs are still finding themselves down 3-1.
I think he still looks hurt too, if I'm being honest.
No, 100%.
He's
he
not
does.
100% at all. So no. I get saying that Mobley's handling him. I think there's a little bit of both. Mobley is playing him well, no doubt. Randle does not look 100%. And all credit to him to be out there for your team when you're not really healthy.
And we all, I think, figured he would play. It's the playoffs. That this is what these players do. This is what these guys do. But yeah, I think I have the same belief. There's been moments where you've kind of seen him ailing through things and working through things, and it's been pretty obvious that he is not 100% and he's still dealing with something, which is fine. But yeah, the fact that he's been a non-factor, you would have thought that the Cavs would have a lead in this series, and they didn't. Now, let's get to the big. I don't even know if it's an elephant in the room because it's that obvious. I guess that's the point of the phrase, the elephant in the room, though. Donovan Mitchell, just an abysmal performance in the arena that he grew up just dreaming of playing in when he was a young lad playing basketball, and he drops 11 points, 5 of 18 from the floor, shot 27% in Game 4. He was the team's leading scorer with 22 on Friday's Game 3, but it didn't feel like it was like an impactful 22 points. It didn't feel like the Donovan Mitchell takeover performance that we've seen at times this year, like when he dropped 71. I was watching the Heat Bucks game last night, and I was mesmerized by Jimmy Butler, who continues to just be a different beast in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. And I had to sit there and say, like, I hope that Donovan Mitchell is watching this game and gets some sort of motivation from it, because, and listen, he did that in the bubble. He had a better game than Butler. He put up 57 points on that list that they flashed up on the screen last night. But I just, like, that was what I was thinking. And maybe not even 50-plus points, but I was expecting Mitchell in some game this series to just go Super Saiyan mode and take over a game because the team maybe was struggling a little bit. We know, we always bring up that they're young and it's a learning experience for these guys. I was stunned that neither of the games in New York did he do that. I thought it was going to be Game 3. When it wasn't, I was sure it was going to be Game 4 with them on the brink of knowing if we go down 3-1, our chances are slim of advancing here. We got to get this one. And he played even worse in Game 4. Like him shrinking on that stage and in that moment was not something that I accounted for whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that scoring definitely was disappointing. The biggest disappointment for me, especially watching Game 4, was the turnovers. He had 6 turnovers. I mean, that you can't have that. And especially because of what the turnovers were. I mean, in the first half, it was a weak pass that got picked off. I mean, those scoring comes and goes. Sometimes you're just not going to make your open shots. I get that. You don't want that to happen in the playoffs, but sometimes it just happens. 6 turnovers. I mean, that really was like wow, that was not a great game from Mitchell there.
It was a frustrating game. And you're right, like, there's going to be nights where guys are off. I mean, Darius had it in Game 3. Like, it was the worst possible time for those two guys, maybe your most important offensive weapons at this point in the development of Evan Mobley. Like, for those two guys to have maybe two of their worst performances of their career back-to-back nights in the playoffs, it's a fluky thing. It's weird. You don't expect it, and you hope it doesn't happen. But yeah, like it was more than just that though with Mitchell, like you said, with the scoring. It was the turnovers, it was just the mistakes from a guy who's a veteran in this league and has been on this. He's the one guy you said, like, he's been on the stage many times. He knows what it takes, and he's the one kind of costing you. Just shocking.
He's the one guys are looking to, and when when you have the guy that everyone's looking to has 6 turnovers, I mean that can't be great for morale at all.
and credit to him, he took it on the nose after the game. Like he said, it's on me. I know these guys are looking to me, and I got to be better. I will say the Knicks, and he mentioned this too, like the Knicks tried some different things with him, threw a lot more double teams. Mm-hmm. But it's not like that's not something that Donovan Mitchell's seen before. Right. And yeah, it's been an issue. The other thing I want to get into here, and then we'll talk a little bit about...
Quick thing, back to Mitchell.
Sure.
I will say, the one thing I have been we talk about this team's youth and experience, all of that. I will say that throughout this entire series, they've gotten their butts kicked a few times here. They've never made excuses. And I think that is a big thing in terms of development. Like you said, Mitchell straight up said, like, I played terrible. I played horrible. And I do think that does say something for this team, and the identity that they built is that, you know what, we own up to it. We got to be more aggressive. Remember, after game one, Garland said, we got to hit first, and they did. So I think that not making those excuses has definitely been something that's kind of like, as a fan, like relieving to see that like they see what we're seeing too, I guess.
We'll talk about Game 5 here in a second, and maybe Mitchell chance at redemption in Game 6 back in New York. We'll see if we think that's on the table here. But I do want to get. I think we can't advance the conversation to that point until we at least mention JB Bickerstaff. And what do we make of him at this point as a head coach? I think it's pretty obvious he's getting out coached by Tom Thibodeau, and people are going to start calling for his job.
Already have.
I mean, they were doing it during the regular season. I think what I'll say, Tommy, and then I'll give it to you, is I don't think this organization is going to make any rash decisions and just fire him. I think they're going to slow play this and say, hey, it was his first sort of go at it. We'll come back next year and try again. But I also can't really push back on anybody at this point who has maybe some problems with JB as the guy as leading this group moving forward. Like, if people have complaints, if people see things that aren't working, and he's sort of shown his butt in some instances throughout this playoffs, where he just doesn't maybe know, or the situation's maybe even too big for him. I can't blame them for feeling that way. I really can't. So I hear those arguments. I don't think the Cavs are going to make that rash decision, but I do think this series has maybe opened up even more people's eyes to the possibility of, do we need a different coach? And that will be an ongoing conversation throughout the offseason, assuming that the Cavs don't come back here. I also will say one other thing real quick. I was okay with him inserting LeVert into the starting lineup. I was okay with that. I know some people were against it. They felt like coming off the bench, you needed that scoring from LeVert, but I thought that he was giving you something that Okoro just wasn't offensively, and he was also doing a pretty good job against Brunson for the first couple games, so it made sense at the time. It didn't work. I'm not going to fault him 100. Like, I'm not going to. It is his fault, I guess, ultimately, because he made the change. But I'm not going to sit here and bash him for trying something that was proved to be beneficial for them in earlier games. But it ultimately backfired. I think there's bigger issues with JB and bigger questions with JB than just that one move that he made.
For sure. I think that, putting Karras in the starting lineup was kind of a no-brainer at that point. I mean, to be honest with you, he's been the best, most consistent player for the Cavs this entire series. And at some point, that player's got to be in the starting lineup. So have no issue with him doing that. In terms of people calling for his job, I get the frustration. There definitely have been some situations where, he's been outcoached in the series. But I do go back to, this is, when we say this is their first time, when we say that the Cavs are young and experienced, that goes beyond the players. Bickerstaff's had, I think, one playoff series as a head coach. And so he's obviously going to be learning stuff as they go on too. Coaching in a 7 best of 7 game series is different than coaching in the regular season. It just is. So maybe he is the guy to go forward, and he's going to learn from this and get better and become a better coach. That's fantastic. Firing him after one playoff series, when this isn't the year for the Cavs, right? This is not the championship or bust year yet. We'll get there eventually, but we're not there yet. For those that want Bickerstaff gone, what's next? Who do you bring in? Are you going to bring in? I don't even know who would be on the block right now.
I would guess people's first option would be Nick Nurse, guy who's won a championship, all that. I get it, but
but does Nick Nurse want to be here? I mean, you have to look at all these different scenarios. So I guess I get the Nick Nurse comparison, but I mean, again, this is the coach that and Bickerstaff said this before too. It's very rare that you see a coach go through, the entire rebuilding process and getting up to like the playoff and contending phase. And so far he's done that. And I don't know. I think that would be I think it would be a mistake. I do.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even with bringing in a new coach, there's always going to be setbacks. You're going to take 2 steps back in order to get what the coaches scheme and everything. So
a couple weeks ago, I would have been very much with you in that, like, yeah, he deserves another year, slow play this thing. I do think this series has opened my eyes a little bit, though, where I'm like, if they made a switch and you knew that and you felt you really good about the guy that they brought in, now I don't know that option's out there, and so that's where I'm a little hesitant, but if you felt good about it, I wouldn't fault them because I think there's some serious questions, and this series was an eye-opener for sure. Tommy, to get us out of here, what are your expectations for Game 5? Do the Cavs have a chance to maybe come back in this series at all? We'll save some of the questions going into the offseason for a podcast once the season is officially over. But I want to know where your head's at going into this Game 5 tomorrow night.
I think they win Game 5. I think the Cavs do push and go to a Game 6 in New York. I'm not going to say what I think after that point. We'll talk about that when and if they get there. But I do think they win tomorrow. I think that they played well at home all season. They played not great in Game 1, but played fantastic in Game 2. I think we see more of that in Game 5, and then they push it to Game 6. And again, we'll see what happens.
Now, here's a point we agree on. I'm right there with you. I think they win Game 5. I felt good about them winning Game 5, whether they won or lost on Sunday. If they don't win Game 5, I think it speaks to this team maybe being at a point where they're just like done, like they're almost giving up in a way. And then that's another question that goes on the rack against JB Bickerstaff. Like, did you really have these guys ready? Were they really ramped up to go? But I have some faith. I have some faith they can win Game 5. If you win Game 5 and you get a vintage Donovan Mitchell performance, maybe, just maybe, at Madison Square Garden, then maybe there's a chance they can come back in this series and go to 7. But we'll see. We'll certainly have coverage for you over at CavsInsider.com. Appreciate you guys following along over there as always, and on Twitter at CavsInsider_FN, and through this podcast on our YouTube channel. So keep it locked. I'll be at the arena. I'm sure Tommy and I will have a conversation post-game about what we see unfold, and you can follow along with everything again with Cavs Insider. Appreciate you guys. Take it easy. We'll see if hopefully we're talking about a Cavs win on Wednesday night. Thanks for watching.